Delighted today to talk through best practices for effective writing in fundraising. And so often this sort of ends up being, a lot of the best practices in writing in fundraising are built around annual giving, but increasingly it's becoming super important in major and planned giving. So we're excited to dive in there as well. Some of you probably don't care about this, but some of you are going to care deeply. This session is approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. So my colleague Simone, who's also on the line, put a bunch of work into this, and this will help you with your professional certification. At the end of the process, at the end of the session rather, we'll drop a survey link, and you just have to fill that out to make sure you get credit for this. So, and you basically, by the way, are in charge of keeping your own records, and then if you get audited, we'll back you up. So it's a pretty simple process from there. Welcome. So some quick agendas. Intros, we'll talk about writing for mass appeals. We'll then talk about actually how do you write one-on-one as more and more major and planned giving is moving to written communication. We'll talk about text messaging, which is becoming increasingly important. We'll talk through some examples, and we'll do next steps in Q&A. And some of you will want to furiously take notes, and feel free to do that, but we will send the recording and all the slides later today. So you'll have that in your inbox in probably a few hours. So if you just want to sort of sit and soak as much in as possible, that's great too. So quick introductions. So my name is Patrick. I'm lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of an organization called FreeWill. And actually this week and the next few months, I'm actually the solo CEO. And that's because my wonderful co-founder, Jenny Schiass-Bradling, and her amazing husband, Pete, were blessed with their first child last week. So baby Marco is finally home from the hospital and doing super well. So Jenny is out caring for her newborn, which is really one of the things that's making us happiest around here. And then separately, we're just delighted to work alongside about 90 folks who are pretty wonderful. We are so close, but not quite at $3 billion raised. So hopefully the next time we talk, we'll be able to celebrate that as well. All right, so most of my work now is with FreeWill, but in the past, I was really lucky to work with President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle and then Vice President Joe Biden, who's obviously now the president. And one of the things that our team would do is we would routinely email 10 million people on behalf of the president or other folks there. A team of 10 or so, really smart folks, really appreciated that team. And one of the things that I think we did particularly well is that we were really curious as opposed to being right all the time. And so we ran these A/B experiments all the time to understand what kind of writing actually moved people and what was just writing that we thought was good, but was only sort of impressing ourselves and not actually generating a lot more money in terms of fundraising. And actually, one of the interesting things I found out is that we were wrong all the time. So we'd always sort of make our guesses before the email test went out to say, oh, we think this is going to perform better. And even the smartest among us were barely batting 50% in terms of guessing what's right. So if you had put a monkey in the room, that monkey would have outperformed most of us in terms of trying to figure out what would go well and what wouldn't. And so a really interesting laboratory to sort of understand what actually causes people to give money and what doesn't, which can sometimes be counterintuitive. So some of that will inform the rest of this, and then obviously a lot of research that we've done on our own. And then separately, one of my favorite books on writing that I think has really influenced my own work, as well as a lot of other people that I admire, is this book called On Writing Well. So this book is probably 30, 40 years old at this point, maybe even more. And so we're actually going to send a copy to about 20 folks. We'll sort of randomly select. So don't put your address in now. At the end, we'll pop this survey in the chat, and then we'll ask you whether you're interested. And if you're interested, just please send us your physical address so we can send it to you. So this book is great, highly recommended overall. And it's a really sort of great guide to clear writing. So before we dive in on this, let's just talk about how your week is going. And look at this. This blue line is happiness. This yellow line is anxiety. And you can see that really starting around January 14th, it starts to really drift up towards happiness and people are much less anxious. And I mean, just what an incredible manifestation of what the world is doing. And so you can see the happiness is up to 60%. And then suddenly the anxiety is ticked up a little bit this week, but about 22%, which is probably the second lowest we've seen or third lowest we've seen in the past 15 months. So pretty cool. And then we asked what you're worried about. And most of it is around hitting goals and doing your job well, which is an important concern. But you can see how much coworkers' health and safety and donors' health and safety is is drifted down. And even look at this sort of dark hunter green line is around losing my job, which actually peaked at about a third of folks are worried about that last year, April 24th, and now it's barely cracking 1%. So that's really exciting to see just some of the economy turn around, but also the nonprofit industry turn around. This, by the way, is a really good sign if you're looking for a job, either if you're currently unemployed or if you're thinking, maybe I'm not in the right fit. It's actually a pretty strong hiring market across the board. And then actually, as a side note in particular, one thing that we see is that a lot of financial years at nonprofits are July 1st, right? That's a very common one, along with January 1st for financial years, when it means new budgets come into effect, et cetera. And so if you're looking for a job, July 1 is a really good time to start searching, because that's when new roles will get approved, et cetera. So just a side note for some of you who I know have had a little bit rougher time during the pandemic, and I hope it's a little bit helpful. All right, so let's talk about why effective writing matters. So one thing we're seeing is that email writing is increasingly important. So emails drove 19% of online donations in 2020. This was up for only 14% in 2019. That's a massive gap. It's 50% more donations from email year over year in 1 year, 33%, excuse me. And for every 1,000 fundraising emails sent, nonprofits are now getting $78, which is a 35% increase over 2019. So not only are more people making gifts, it's not just that more emails getting sent, it's that each email is actually more effective, which is pretty exciting. Obviously, things like better emails equals higher open rates, higher response rates, more dollars raised for the really important work that you're doing. And this messaging obviously translates directly to fundraising dollars. Now, one of the nice things about getting good at writing is it actually takes less time to be more effective. And that's one of the big goals for today. Let's make it actually easier and give you a little bit of a formula for how to write a really great message so that you can do it more quickly and be more effective at the same time. One of the other things we're seeing in planned giving in particular, so we study a lot of planned giving, is that what we call standalone emails, which is emails just about planned giving, are twice as effective at securing bequests compared to newsletters or other things like that. And so this idea of like having one clear message results in actually really big planned giving wins if that's your area. Hi, Susan from Bainbridge Island, who just introduced herself. Jenny and her partner and the new baby are actually all on Bainbridge Island as well. So that's very exciting. And so we asked you, by the way, for planned and major gifts, you said your top 3 effective methods are in-person visits, not surprising, one-to-one emails. So this is really rising in importance, and then phone and video calls. So that's what the sort of the wisdom of the crowds are doing in terms of suggesting and gaining new big gifts. The other thing we're seeing, that why is writing more important? Well, writing has become a real-time communication tool, whereas it used to be only in direct mail and handwritten notes. And this is important because older donors, which are going to be the majority of your major donors, and certainly your planned giving donors, are spending twice as much time online compared to 3 years ago. So and that behavior is shifting, right? So there's doing what analysts call pre-shopping with mortgages, cars, houses, medical diagnoses, all these things that you would have thought, too important to do on the internet. I've got to talk to a human. Well, suddenly that's all shifting online. And as people get more comfortable with each of these things, so it's not just that the nonprofit world is changing behavior, the financial services world is changing behavior, the real estate world is changing behavior. And so suddenly people are more and more comfortable with bigger and bigger decisions online. And so people really want to read, they want to do this sort of pre-research before they speak to you. And this is all true of planned and major giving donors. So more and more of this work is sort of starts in writing before moving to conversations, as opposed to what might have happened even 2 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So many planned and major giving officers are really shifting their behavior to getting better at writing as a way to hit their goals and secure really, really big gifts. So we ask you, how confident are you in your professional writing abilities? And everyone said a 4. Everyone said, I'm a 4. I'm not a 5, I'm not a 3. More than 50% of people rank themselves as a 4 on a scale of 1 to 5. The average was 3.8. So there are a couple 1s and 2s in there, but 4 was the dominant number. And so our goal here is like, let's actually start pushing you to 5. Not just, are you an effective writer generally, but do you know a couple of really key frameworks to use in fundraising emails? So we'll summarize what we mean by good writing, and then we'll actually lay out how to hit this. So this will be a quick session. Good writing is exceedingly clear. It's easy to understand. It can be skimmed for main takeaways. A really important note is that a lot of people are reading this on their phone, and they're reading it quickly. It appeals to a broad audience. This is a really important point that I hope you put on a Post-it at your computer when you're writing. Emails written at a third grade level receive 36% more responses than those at a college reading level, and 17% more than those at a high school reading level. So just reiterate this. Third grade level, a third more effective than college level writing. And it will probably take you less time to do this, and you'll be generating a third more giving for your organization. So this is a really important point. It is not important to show how smart you are. It is important to be as clear and concise as possible. So why is concision important? Well, I told you earlier that twice as much time is spent online by older adults now. But what's happening with reopening is that less of that time online is going to be at home, and more of it is going to be in transit, moving around on the go. And now more than 50% of emails are read on mobile phones. So we're using fewer, stronger words. We're cutting out unnecessary details. We're cutting out unnecessary language. We're keeping it short. And short means 2 to 3 paragraphs, 50 to 125 words, etc. Jay notes that it's much harder to write at a third grade level for well-educated individuals. We don't mean talking about sort of puppies and unless you're an animal shelter and sort of third grade level subjects, but being as clear as possible is really important. It's also persuasive. So how are people actually persuaded? Well, telling stories of individuals, or in some cases, an individual animal or an individual place, if that's a little bit more of your repertoire, increases gifts. This is interesting and somewhat counterintuitive for a lot of us. Presenting general statistics alongside an individual story actually decreases gifts. So when you start sort of moving into data, you actually shift the part of the mind that's being activated, and suddenly you make it a little bit more compelling, even if it's more sort of like analytically strong. It uses things like repetition, reasons. We're going to talk about one of my favorite studies on this, social proof, comparisons, and other things like that. And it's also emotional. So sometimes you feel like your job is to be really calm, really collected all the time. Well, over neutral emails, moderately negative emails actually receive 13% more responses. And then happy emails, you don't have to be angry, receive 15% more responses than neutral emails. So in either direction, you're going to be able to push and generate more emotion from the individual. So why is that true, right? I mean, it's nice to know that it's true, but what's actually happening? And what we see is that compelling stories activate the brain and strengthen emotional connections. So when you're talking about smells and tastes in an email, it actually activates the brain's sensory cortex that would activate when they actually smell or taste something, right? When you talk about movement, it actually starts to activate the motor cortex. So if you're describing bike riding or running or canoeing, all of this will actually start activating the part of your brain that would be in effect if you were actually canoeing or biking or running. So really interesting. And we begin to identify as if it was happening to us. And so suddenly that experience is so much stronger than reading a bunch of statistics, which never actually happens to us. And then also we see that narrative arcs in particular produce love and stress hormones, and these affect the way we feel, which affects how we act. So one experiment showed that participants who watched an emotional story and produced oxytocin, which is one of the love hormones, was more willing to donate to charity afterwards, right? So we're actually thinking, how do we activate the different portions of the brain in our writing as a framework, right? So let's talk through what that looks like. So here are some very practical things. And at the end of the session, we'll actually just give you a checklist to say, are we doing this, are we doing this, are we doing this? So tip ones. Claire asks, by the way, what about sad emails? Sad emails fall into the same category, right? So that's a negative emotion. Even sadness isn't always negative, but it's really pushing some level of emotion will drive a lot more behavior. Okay, so first things first, the most important thing that you're not doing, almost certainly right now, is paying a lot of attention to the subject line. I mean, just do a quick sort of mental note. How much time in your the last thing you were writing, how much time went to the writing and how much time went to the subject line? And it's probably like 95.5 or 99.1. But really, the subject line is going to be one of the dominant sources of success or failure for an organization in their fundraising. So a nonprofit sends an average of 59 emails each subscriber a year, and nearly half of these are fundraising emails. And so you need to stand out. Now, this means that someone who's donating is likely donating to multiple places, so you need to stand out there. But as you can probably imagine, They're getting political emails. They're getting travel and leisure emails. They're getting stuff from their favorite restaurants and bars, from their favorite coffee shops, from their kids' school. And there's just a lot of email. I mean, some of you might have a rough guess as to how many emails you receive in a day. I probably get 600 a day between personal and work. And a lot of those are mass emails. Some of them are personal stuff. But standing out is a really big, important thing here. And so how do you actually stand out? The key to standing out as a subject line is you have to present the gap between what we know and what we want to know. So we call this the curiosity gap, and I'll show you what this looks like. So with the subject line, you want to pique interest and withhold key information to encourage open rates. This is like pausing pausing a story at a climactic moment. You might introduce an idea that has an unlikely outcome, but you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, right? Those of you that are spending a lot of time on the internet, you see these little ads in the corner, and they're like one food that will, help you lose 50 pounds overnight. And that is just false information, right? It's clickbait. And that's not what you want to be. But let's talk about some examples. So first one might be a new trend that we're seeing. And now someone's interested in opening that to understand what the trend is. We thought of you today. You can imagine the likelihood of someone opening that. A big change at the land trust. Our cutest puppy of the week. What this student accomplished. The 2 most impactful steps. A tool that is getting a lot of use. A better way to help. In each of these, what we're doing is we're demonstrating the promise of what's actually in the message without necessarily giving it all away, right? So you can start to think, okay, in my own work, what is that level of curiosity gap in the next message? And this will drive significantly higher open rates, which in turn will drive a lot higher action rates. So now that we have someone opening our message, the number 2 thing is grabbing attention in the first line of the email. So the average woman, and this might be a little bit outdated, so it might be a little bit shorter, reads an email for 7 seconds before deciding whether to continue to read. And the average man reads for about 2 seconds, right? A little bit more impatient there. And so after hooking supporters with your subject line, you have a very short time to catch people's attention before they decide to move on. So what we're doing here is we're starting with the most important information, right? A lot of people say, hi, hope you're well. You can just sort of skip that. Updates on the organization, big news about your work or mission, how you're providing value to the reader. So here are a couple of examples in the first line. Still no plans for the summer? Here's one that you actually need. There's a huge change underway at the museum, and I thought you'd like to know. The class of 2021 is facing 3 big challenges right now. I wanted to share what Jane Doe, or whomever the donor is, did this week, and I hope it makes you really happy. And you can see how each of these lines is really structured to say, okay, I'm getting a general sense of what this message is about, and I'm strongly inclined to read it. So that's how we're starting. And then as we get to the core of it, this is really important. This is what we call the impact gap. So we have the curiosity gap and we have the impact gap. Now, what's an impact gap? Is understanding what is newly possible with the help of this supporter. So you want to define the present moment. Something like right now, our school is working hard to transition online. We're defining the problem, but some students don't have adequate devices to engage, right? So we have a very clear scenario and a problem, and the solution is baked into getting the supporters help. If we can get laptops and tablets in the hands of students ASAP, they can still have a productive semester. So now I, as a supporter, say, oh, wow, there's a very clear problem, and there's a solution that exists. And what happens here is that I am the solution. And I can clearly understand not just sort of general funding, but that this will give a tangible, tactile impact on something that's important to me. So tangible impact always wins in research. You can say things like 1 share of stock could provide 80 meals. This scholarship will help 1 lower income student shift the course of her life. Or a gift from your IRA will help us reach the 90% threshold for the class of 1948, right? And this third example actually isn't what the gift is going to do, but it's what the involvement will accomplish. And even having clear goals like this will be really helpful. And so sometimes what you see when people have general funds that they're raising for instead of very specific action, say, we're 10% away from hitting our goal of X. And that way you can really identify, wow, I'm helping make progress to this thing that seems important. Tip 4 here is make your ask at least 3 times. So you can make indirect asks. And here's an example. When storytelling or an update from the organization, link to ways they can help. As a side note, you really want to include planned and major gifts here, right? The worst thing you can do is email major donor and then they give $50 and they feel like they already did their thing. And if you're not linking to helping people give stock, helping people make bequests, gifts that are going to be 100 or 10,000 times larger in some contexts, you're really missing out and you're really undervaluing that donor. But as an example here, if we can get laptops and tablets in their hands ASAP, right? So if we would link this whole portion of the email, that will sort of begin to open up this indirect ask. And then direct asks, including a call to action or different ways people can help, things like tax-savvy stock donations, et cetera, leaving a gift in your will, volunteering is really important. But you want to make sure this is showing up multiple times in the message. And then 5, here's a really important thing that people get wrong a lot, is keeping it conversational. So sometimes, especially folks that are newer to fundraising, feel like they've really got to sort of sound like an adult, and then they sort of end up sounding like what a kid thinks an adult sounds like. But you don't have to be overly formal, right? Thinking about a letter to a friend, or if you're totally new and you have very casual relationships, think about, a letter to a friend of your parents. You want to write like you're speaking to a close friend or family member. Some people even put a picture of this person at their desk so that they can think about writing one-to-one, right? This email is a one-to-one medium, even when it goes to 1 million people. And having that really clear one-to-one conversational style is really important. And then you're using simple human language, right? You wouldn't write to your friend using a whole bunch of weird jargon. Remember this 3rd grade reading level. And then this is especially true for major gift officers. Now, why is that? Well, it turns out that the dominant thing that determines how successful major giving teams are is how good they are with non-cash gifts. And so when you're talking about stock giving, you're talking about IRA giving, you're talking about donor advised funds, all of this has to be really sort of simple and clear and taking out jargon as much as possible. The other bonus tip, and we don't think of this as writing, but it's obviously incredibly important in the medium, is including images. So people remember pictures. Here's some research around it. If you just hear information, you'll remember 10% of it 3 days later. But if you add an image, you can remember about 65% of it 3 days later. And so this is incredibly important. You want to use a compelling image that illustrates your story and catches attention. One quick thing here, there are two thoughts here. One is you don't need to have super high quality professional images. Sometimes people sort of go overboard. In the same way that you would text a photo of your dog or your babies or you and your friends to your other friends, your parents or whomever, that can be the same thing with donors. You don't want it to feel overly produced. The other thing I'll note is that we often have images on almost all of these slides, and there's a great website called Unsplash. Maybe Simone or someone else can type it into the chat. I think it's unsplash.com. This has all sort of extremely high quality stock imagery. Some of it ends up being a little bit hipster, but you can always work around that. And it's totally free. And it's just a really wonderful site. I know some other folks. Marissa suggests Pexels. Lindsay says Unsplash is the best. But it's just amazing, right? So there's tens of thousands of photos, and we go through them all the time for this. And as you can start to pay attention to the pictures in the bottom left. And all those are from Unsplash along the way. And then sometimes people will do breakdowns with an infographic on more complicated gifts. So that's also really helpful. And then before we move on to one-to-one stuff, our friends over at M&R, who some of you will know, some of you won't, but they do a lot of sort of mass annual giving stuff, and quite well, I think. So they have a benchmarking tool where you can actually start typing in the results from your own stuff and then calculate to see how do you compare against other folks in the sector in terms of fundraising emails, open rates, click-through rates, et cetera. So it might be useful. We'll send it to you after the fact. So let's talk about writing personal appeals. And by personal, they're all personal appeals, right? But in this case, we mean when you're just writing to one person. How is that different from writing to 10,000 donors at a time? The first one is really key here. And this is probably also true of your one-to-many. So does anyone know what this picture is of? I'm going to take a quick sip of water while people guess, and then we'll lead on this point. Sarah is correct. Anybody else have guesses? Thanks, Molly. And Karen and Kat. So this is Georgetown University, founder John Carroll. And Georgetown is the college that I went to, right? So as my undergrad, grade school, really loved it. If any of you are from working at Georgetown, thank you for all that you're doing. But Georgetown sometimes writes to me for money, right? And I'm sure your alma mater does the same thing for you. And especially when I was sort of 25, 26, I'd be like, you should give me money. Georgetown is a big institution. It's got $1 billion plus endowment. It has a lot more money than I do, and certainly everyone I know. And so if you are, especially if you're in this context, if you're writing for Princeton or you're writing for the Guggenheim or one of the big museums or something that people sort of think is actually more prestigious, much more important than they are, it's really important to be vulnerable and human. And so what we mean that is remind people that you're just another human doing your job, living your life, etc. And really start with introducing yourself as a person so that you don't sort of seem like the voice of this massive institution, right? This is a really big shift. And so here's an example that you might sort of open a one-to-one message with. Say, I'm fostering one of our newest puppies and it's been hard trying to help him adjust to people before he finds his forever home, but I'm taking the time to write to you because whatever mission matters more than ever. Or you might say, I'm about to take my son Roger to his first baseball practice in 15 months, but I wanted to write to you before we headed out because this is so important, right? And suddenly they can imagine this person who has a family and a life that isn't totally their job, working on behalf of this institution they also care about, and it's a totally different dynamic than if you write on behalf of Stanford University or if you write on behalf of Rice. Another thing is that you can also meet and acknowledge the humanity of the donor. So it's not just this sort of like high level institution donor relationship, it's just two humans meeting over common cause. So you might say, I know it's a busier time than usual for you as you and your family make up for the summer plans you missed last year, but I wanted to share this thing, right? And so you're acknowledging each other's humanity, and nothing sort of earns the right to continue on that message and continue that conversation than really establishing that initial connection. Really important. Laura asks, is it better to write from I than we? That is a great question. So in the next slide, she says, we want you to remove the we as much as possible. It doesn't mean you can't ever use it, but really you are one person sending an email to one person. Sometimes people want to co-sign things, but if you sort of do a check-in on your non-professional life, think about how many times you send emails from multiple people, right? And occasionally it might be from you and your spouse, but for the most part, it's just a one-to-one communication. And so this we creates a sort of artificialness that makes it seem like, oh, this is not a real message, right? This is sort of a mass broadcast as opposed to just to me. So you don't want to write from multiple people in case there's a very clear reason to do so. You might say, from Patrick, parentheses, and the rest of the FreeWill team, or something else that sort of acknowledges there's other people who also do this stuff and are also grateful, but you're not really writing, it's not like all 90 of us sort of type around a computer when we do that. So would you recommend this for mass email too? Yes. So remember, mass email is only mass to you, right? If I get it, I'm only receiving it in a one-to-one channel. And so much of this will apply to mass email. The more that your mass email feels like a one-to-one message, the better off you are. And so the other thing here is talking about social proof. So one of the most powerful things that we've seen in psychology is what's called social proof. It's telling stories about other supporters. So you don't want to say things like, wow, you can save up to 80% on taxes through giving stock. You do say, someone in the class above you, also from California, just donated stock and got an almost 80% tax benefit. And people are very, very open to understanding what people in their peer set are doing, right? This is one of the most compelling things. And when we actually do these sessions, some of the things that people are most excited about is hearing examples from peers, is hearing survey results from peers. This is really built into us. We're always trying to sort of check what other folks who are similarly situated are doing. Here's some research from our friend, Dr. Russell James. And this is when I think a series of lawyers were asking folks about plan gifts. So when there's no reference to charity, about 5% of plans included a bequest. When we just asked, would you like to leave any money to charity in your will? That doubled. It's pretty exciting, right? You just actually make sure philanthropy is front and center in the process. And then I move social proof, and many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will. Are there any causes that you're passionate about? And this, 15%, right? So the difference between using social proof and asking is almost as big as the difference between not asking and asking. And that's how powerful this is. And so start to say, okay, where can I start to work this into some of my messages? And all of you that are 4 in writing, this is one of the things that's going to get you to a 5 in terms of being high impact. Now, what you don't want to do is negative social proof. So something like only a fraction of our supporters respond, will you be one of them? Now, why would you not want to do this? Well, what you're doing is you're signaling most people like you don't do this. Do you want to be different? And I think, heck no, I don't want to be different. I want to fit in. So when you signal this, you can't use social proof in the wrong way. One of this really interesting example, there's a place called the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. They observed the signs of negative social proof. So they put up 2 signs. Please don't remove petrified wood. That's good. Many past visitors have removed petrified wood. Don't do it. This actually tripled the amount of theft of petrified wood from the forest, exactly the thing they didn't want to do. Now, why did that happen? Well, this sign told them that it's a social norm to steal petrified wood from this ancient forest. Now, it's pretty sad that that happened, but you can see that actually the psychological effects of just having these 2 signs. I mean, it's pretty dramatic how big these gaps can be. 8, another thing that works really well that we were surprised to learn works well is that you can add surprise when sharing new topics. So language like did you know, or you might be surprised to learn, this triggers curiosity and reduces defensiveness. Some supporters are surprised they can receive more than 50% in tax savings when donating stock, and more than 70% in some cases. And what we're telling people is that it's okay if you didn't know this, right? Some supporters are surprised. It's okay that you didn't know this, but a lot of people are learning about this, and you can be one of those people who are learning, right? So here what we're doing is we're not just social proofing stock donations, that's important. We're also social proofing learning about stock donations and being open to change, which is really important in fundraising, right? Because if you can get people to shift their giving style from cash to stock, suddenly their gifts are gonna be 10 times larger and you're hitting goals like you never did before. 9, providing reasons to give. And we talked a little bit about this in the impact gap, but this is one of my favorite studies. The word because is a powerful word that drives behavior. So when you ask for a favor or a donation, you'll be much more successful if you provide a clear reason immediately after the fact. So great study. This is by Professor Ellen Langer at Harvard. It's published in 1977. It's called the Copy Machine Study. Now, what is the Copy Machine Study? So by the way, all these studies, as some of you who work in higher ed happen, they all happen on grad students, right? There's always a grad student who needs 25 bucks and is willing to run these studies. And so that's how most of these things happen at colleges. And what they had, this is in the 70s, right? So those of you that were working in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, remember that copy machines were like the thing. You always need to make copies. And so there'd be a line at the copy machine. And what we had is we had the student come in and try to cut the line. And he would say, or she would say, excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the Xerox machine? And 60% of the time, people would say, yes, yeah, go ahead, cut. Right? So generally people are nice, especially at Harvard and the grad school departments, but 60% not bad. Now, when we gave a real reason, say, excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? 94%, so a massive accommodation, right? The student could sort of get anything she or he wanted with this very clear reason, because I'm in a rush, it makes sense. Now, the best part about this is the third trial, the third control they used is they said a fake reason, right? Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies? Now, because I have to make copies is exactly the same as this first group, right? You use the Xerox machine. You're not going to use the Xerox machine for anything besides copies. And yet, it only had a 1% decline from this real reason, right? And so having any reason at all creates a lot more incentive. Now, it's always, you should be having real reasons here, but it demonstrates how powerful this shift is. And then the last thing is that personalization is king. So hearing your own name triggers greater brain activation. This is particularly true in the parts associated with long-term social behavior and long-term memory, right? So this will click, right? So there's, based on the sort of rough ages of gift officers in America, there are gonna be a lot of Emilys on the phone. There's gonna be a lot of Michaels, a lot of Sarahs, a lot of Jennifers. And if that's one of your names, you probably just perked up a little bit, right? You just heard, you're going to pay a little bit more attention to this slide than everybody else will. And that's because our brains are hardwired that way. So it tells your brain to pay attention and that the information is relevant to you. So the more personalization, the greater this is. It also gives people a greater sense of control and reduces this feeling of information overload, right? Remember how many emails people are getting, how much general content they're getting every day. And so in order to break through and feel comfortable to actually engage here, as opposed to sort of deal with the onslaught of information, more personalization gives them that sense of control. And so what are we doing? We're always addressing our reader by name. I'm sure that many of you are doing this already, but then you want to go beyond name. And so you want to remember and refer back to the personal information your donor has shared with you. This is particularly true in one-on-one where you can do this, but also in mass emails, there are a bunch of different ways to do this as well. So what is their favorite piece of art? Did you ask? And when you asked, did you make a note? What is their class here? What is their kids or their spouse's names? And then the other big thing here, which you should have very easy access to in your CRM, is you want to send progress on updates for causes they've previously donated to. And this is key, name specific dates. So, hi Jennifer, last January 16th, you made a $100 donation to this new exhibit that we're putting up. Here are some pictures of it. I hope you enjoyed it. That gift was really meaningful. And suddenly that feels incredibly powerful to that person. And all you did was look up basic gift history, which you probably have at your fingertips already. And then one more bonus tip here is we want to use what's called a presumptive close. So this has become a best practice in sales, but is also very keenly used in the nonprofit world. So you want to communicate excitement and interest in speaking with folks. I can't wait to share more about the benefits of stock gifts with you as an example. You want to give specific options instead of yes or no. So do say, would Thursday or Friday work better for a call? And don't say, would you like to schedule a call, right? Because there are two things that have happened now. One is you provided very clear options. People say, okay, well, Thursday and Friday is a little bit more manageable. And would you like to schedule a call, which means, I've got to think about my whole month. And instead of saying yes, no, you give them this option. And so you'll get a lot more people saying, oh, Friday or Thursday, instead of maybe not, or maybe later. So that's how we're writing emails. Now, what are a couple other things happening in the world? Well, it turns out that with more folks on the go, text messaging is becoming incredibly important. So nonprofit text lists grew by 26% in 2020, compared with only 3% growth in email lists. And then click-through rates on these are 6.3% for fundraising, 10% for advocacy, significantly higher than email, right? So when you can text people, you're more likely to get a strong response. People who are active in nonprofits texting messages are more likely to donate than those who received only emails. Now, some of this is correlation, so we don't want to overstate it, but it is the case that hearing multiple ways is going to significantly drive more action. And many donors, especially younger donors, vastly prefer text messages to calls. And 94% of donors over 70 text on a weekly basis. So in many ways, text messages is the most accessible medium for donors across the age group, right? Sometimes people are afraid, by the way, to do this. They think, oh, texting isn't really professional. And just check in with yourself for a moment. Would you rather get a phone call out of the blue or a text message out of the blue, right? If I have friends who call me sort of without texting first, I assume that something's wrong. It's just sort of this whole generational shift. Carmen asks, are WhatsApp messages okay? WhatsApp messages are basically in the same format, right? So WhatsApp should be fine if you have a WhatsApp relationship. And particularly outside the US, WhatsApp is a common tool that people use instead of text messaging, but it has all the same functionality. And why did WhatsApp blow up overseas when text messaging didn't? WhatsApp sort of hasn't quite blown up the same way in the US? Well, it's because more and more US companies made text free early, whereas in Europe and parts of Australia and other places like that, typically you were paying for text messages, and so WhatsApp took off. It's a little aside. So let's talk about writing text. You want to use your first text to build connection. As an example, sending updates on your mission, stories about volunteers, people your organization helps, including images and links. So making this a more rich experience. Pictures are really helpful. You want to keep it short and personal. Text should feel more intimate than email. One good thing with major donors, by the way, is take a picture with the major donor when they visit and then text them the picture afterwards. And that'll be a good way to start the relationship, to start the conversation. But by the way, people ask about permission for texting. One way to think about this is that you have total permission to text somebody one-on-one, and they can ask you to stop. You have to get opt-in to text if you're going to be sending 10,000 text messages through one of these automated systems. So it's a big difference. So here's a couple of example text messages. Sarah says, we're hosting a post-election briefing on Thursday to share what changes the new admin is likely to bring. Should I send you a link? Right. Hey, do you know someone looking to adopt? Here's a photo of one of our puppies ready for their forever home. John, we're planning our next steps at the Alumni Association. You have 90 seconds to take the short survey. And then John will say, yep, and then you'll send him a link. And then you'll have this sort of level of engagement and deeper experience. And then as an advanced method, you want to start integrating texting to all your fundraising communications. So you want to get to text relationships with your major and planned giving donors. You'll have more space. Once a month, you want to send a quick note and a photo to keep folks engaged. You're not always going to get a response, and that's okay. They'll still have Reddit internalized. Text messages have basically 100% open rates, which is obviously a far cry from email. And then we have this whole template that we don't have here for time, but it's thinking of you for text ideas. What you might want to write. And basically the sort of summary of there is, you sort of snap a quick photo. You say, I was at the museum today and I saw a whole new family walking into the new exhibit for the first time. I know you helped funded it. The 6-year-olds were sort of aghast at some of the massive sculptures and just loved it. Thought of you, hope you're having a great day. And that sort of informal message, it just does wonders to build relationships and really help someone really get their heads around the impact they're having. And it's one of the most powerful tools we've seen. It also takes about 60 seconds to do. So it's a great tool to work into your arsenal of giving techniques. All right, so let's do some quick summary, and then we'll share some of the most effective strategies that you said. So just think of this as a checklist, and we'll send the slides around and think, okay, I'm going to go to slide 57, and I'm just going to print this out. Right? So 1, does the subject line inspire curiosity? 2, if I read for 4 seconds, will I want to read more? 3, does a 3rd grader know almost all the words in this message? 4, do I give reasons for what I'm asking? 5, is it written by a human to a human? Did I include an image? And so just go through this. And if all of your messages are in this category, you'll be in pretty good shape. We ask people what their most effective strategies are. And you can see some of this is here in a word cloud. A lot of gift, story, impact, appeal, person, etc. But here are some examples that you shared, right? So what was the most effective thing that you do? 18% of you mentioned really personalizing outreach, which is like what we said. Hopefully that'll get up to 88% next time we do this. A lot of you mentioned donor stories or storytelling. 14% of you mentioned impact and really highlighting the impact that you're having. And getting into tactics, these are all from the community. So thank you guys to everyone who submitted these. You said start strong and directly, beginning, middle, end. Use impact stories and anecdotes. Use metaphors. Focus on shared values. Demonstrate the need and the purpose for funding. Approach the way I would like to be approached for either of these 2 appeals. Reduce copy, highlight an impactful story, feature 1 image. Right? So these are all best practices from you all. Thank you. The writing must be one element of a multi-pronged approach. Email to confirm a meeting, conversation during a meeting, follow-up written materials, follow up with another conversation. The donor wants to clarify elements of the program, right? So as a major gift officer, this is really smart. Appeal to the donor's interest, tailor the appeal to that area, and demonstrate the impact of their giving. Major gifts, describe immediate and specific needs requiring special support, right? This idea of special support, this goes back to the tangible stuff that we talked about earlier in the session. Unplanned gifts show loyalty, consistency, appreciation for their long-term impact. And then one more tip is combine these 3 elements in one piece. A bright, beautiful photo, a heartwarming story, and an illustration of a statistic demonstrating impact. If I can keep it to a page or less, even better. All right, so that's what we have to share today. We're going to talk through a couple of resources we have. So one, we've created this whole guide on how to write effective emails. It will have a lot of the best tips here, but in sort of longer written format. We also have a bunch of templates for really effective texts. And so if you want these, perhaps my colleague Simone can type this in or drop the survey in the chat now. That would be really helpful. We're going to do a group demo on Thursday, June 10th. So not this Thursday, but next Thursday. We know you have a short week, so we give some more time. This is around what are the sort of big advances in planned and major giving tools? What are other organizations doing? And my colleagues Simone and Alyssa will be doing this. They're great. I'm sure you'll enjoy that. And then lastly, if you want a one-on-one demo of the tools, we can hook you up with someone who's great at FreeWill to walk you through it. And those are around stock gifts, bequests, which have raised almost $3 billion in new commitments, and qualified charitable distributions, which are the fastest growing type of gift in the US, gifts directly out of an IRA. And then the last thing, so the survey is in the chat now. Please fill that out. It does wonders for us because we sort of pour over your feedback and try to make things better for next time. Also in the survey is this book that we're going to give away. So just make a note, drop in your address, and we'll do that as well. And we are going to take a 60-second break so you can fill out the survey. I'm going to go through some of the questions and figure out what are the most common ones, and we'll try to answer those next. So thank you for all that you've done in terms of listening and filling out the survey, and then we'll be back in about 30 seconds to answer some of your questions. So let's get to some of your questions. Is the 36% of stat, which is the 36% meaning third grade, messages at a third grade level are 36% more effective than college level? Is that different for all levels of giving, meaning are major givers more sophisticated and they can be written at a higher level? The answer is mostly no. It is true across all fundraising levels. And you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking your major donors are smarter or better educated than everybody else. That's not always going to be the case. So generally, this is going to be true. Really strive for that clarity and concision across that. Great question. Chris is a great, Chris has a question. Our fundraising model is based on grants, large and small, from foundations. How can we take lessons from individual donor communications and apply them to foundations? Chris, there will be more thick processes for foundation grants compared to individual donors, obviously, and you know this because you work very hard at it. One thing I would think about is actually, you have this sort of very formal, you can have very formal applications for grants. I would think about including a note at the top that fits in a lot of these best practices, knowing that there's a human on the other end of the line reviewing these grants and really establishing that connection as well. And then actually you still have to go through and fill out the whole process, obviously, for the grants. So, but don't forget that the foundation is just made up of a bunch of humans trying to do their job well, the same way you are. And so that will be quite helpful. Do you have any efficacy do you have any info about the efficacy of videos for various ages of donors? And this person says, by the way, I hate videos because I want to control the flow of information, but am I a weirdo? Videos tend to be incredibly powerful when done well. One thing that we're seeing, it engages people for longer. You often want to have multiple options, but what we're seeing is that more and more people are doing personalized video. So now that everyone has a cell phone with a camera and a video camera in their pocket, which is obviously a big difference from 25 years ago, the idea that you might send a 30-second or a 90-second video to a major donor that you're making in one shot can be quite compelling. So personalized video feels really strong, and that's really cool. Karen asks, what about saying on behalf of in the sort of I versus we conversation? Even on behalf of feels a little bit too formal. And so I would try to avoid that. It feels a little bit stilted compared to how you would normally communicate with people. And let's do one or two more, and then we'll give everyone a little bit of time before their next session. Susan asks, how many people do you need on staff to be sending all these individualized emails and texts? Susan, what you really want to do here, and those of you who are major giving officers with a portfolio will know this, you just want to prioritize your most likely donors, right? So the folks that are high capacity, high affinity, and depending on your staffing ability, that may be people who can give you 5,000, who could give you 50,000, who could give you 100,000, whomever might be in a portfolio for a major giving team. This is where you really want to lean into those individual gifts. So it's not the case that you don't feel overwhelmed that you have to do this 10,000 times. You could do it 50 times a year and be really, really strong. Dan says, thoughts on placing the recipient's name in the subject line of a one-to-one email? You can do this. This has been done a lot, and so I think its efficacy is waning a little bit. It was certainly very effective 10 years ago, and I've seen it be a little bit less effective now, although I don't have the research on hand to back that up. So let's pause there. Lots of great questions, but just wanted to give you guys a big shout out for stretching yourself here. I know that many of you have been writing for years or decades or many decades professionally. And so coming here and really trying to push yourself to be a little bit better is a really special thing. So thank you so much. Last thing to know is that on June 15th, in a few weeks, we're gonna do a big session on some of the macro trends in 2021, what things like housing prices and crypto and other things are doing and how that actually affects major giving. It'll be a little wonkier, but it should be really interesting. And similar to sort of what we talked about here, we'll do our best to make it really clear, really concise, really accessible. So we'd love to see you there. You can sign up in the survey. And then if you need anything at all, if you have creative ideas, you just want to chat, that's my email right there. So patrick@freewill.com. It's really nice to have you guys here. And thank you so much. So I'm going to get back to work. There's a lot to do in the absence of Jenny while she is at home nursing newborn Marco, but thank you so much for spending an hour today, and looking forward to speaking with you very soon.